the distant times when the world was young and the heavens seemed closer to earth, there lived people whose destinies were woven together with divine purpose. Their stories have been passed down through generations, carrying eternal truths about love, faithfulness, wisdom, and the strength of the human spirit. Let us journey into these ancient narratives, where each chapter of life reveals new facets of human nature. Among the rolling hills of ancient Palestine, where olive trees whispered in the wind and vineyards cascaded down terraced slopes, a child was born who would become legend. His name was Samson, and from his very birth, something extraordinary surrounded him. Samson's mother had been barren for many years. She prayed at the altar with tears streaming down her face, and one day an angel appeared to her with miraculous news. "You will conceive and bear a son," the heavenly messenger said. "But no razor shall touch his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from birth. He will begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines." True to this divine promise, when the boy grew, he possessed strength beyond mortal understanding. With his bare hands, he could tear apart a lion as easily as one might split kindling wood. He could lift city gates, complete with their massive posts, and carry them to a mountaintop. The Philistines, who had oppressed the people of Israel for 40 long years, heard tales of this young man with flowing hair in whom divine power dwelt, and they trembled. Samson's early exploits were born of righteous anger. When the Philistines used trickery to force his wife to reveal the answer to a riddle he had posed at their wedding feast, Samson's fury was kindled like fire. He struck down 30 men in Ashkelon, taking their garments to pay his debt. When the Philistines responded by burning his wife and her father alive, his vengeance was swift and terrible. He struck them hip and thigh with great slaughter, then withdrew to live in the cleft of the rock of Etam. The Philistines came up against Judah in great numbers, demanding that Samson be delivered to them. 3,000 men of Judah came to him and said, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What have you done to us?" Samson allowed them to bind him with new ropes, but when they brought him to the Philistines, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. The ropes on his arms became like flax that has caught fire, and the bonds melted away from his hands. Finding the fresh jawbone of a donkey, he seized it and struck down 1,000 men. For 20 years, Samson judged Israel, and his name became synonymous with divine strength. Yet even the mightiest oak can be felled when the wind finds the right angle, and even the strongest heart can be made vulnerable by love's gentle touch. The weakness that would ultimately prove Samson's undoing came not through the sword or the spear, but through the soft whisper of a woman's voice. In the valley of Sorek, where the grapevines grew thick and sweet, lived a woman whose beauty was renowned throughout the land. Her name was Delilah, and when Samson's eyes fell upon her, his heart was captured more surely than any enemy had ever captured his body. The lords of the Philistines, hearing of this attachment, saw their opportunity at last. They came to Delilah in secret, their robes rustling like serpents in the garden. "Entice him," they whispered, "and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. Each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." Delilah's heart, perhaps, was not entirely mercenary, for she attempted her task with a peculiar gentleness. As they lay together in the evening, When the oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls and the night air was sweet with jasmine, she would stroke his magnificent hair and whisper, "Tell me, my love, where does your great strength lie? How could you be bound and subdued?" 3 times Samson deceived her, sensing perhaps the danger that lurked beneath her caresses. First, he told her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." While he slept, Delilah bound him with 7 fresh bowstrings, and the Philistines she had hidden in an inner chamber waited with held breath. But when she cried, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson," he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a thread snaps when it touches fire. The second time, he told her, "If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak." Again she bound him while he slept. Again the hidden enemies waited, and again she cried the warning. But he snapped the ropes from his arms like thread. The third deception was more elaborate. "If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak." Delilah did as he said, weaving his hair into her loom while he slept. But when the Philistines rushed forward at her signal, Samson awoke and pulled away, carrying with him the pin of the loom and the web. Day after day, Delilah pressed him with her words. Her tears fell like morning dew, and her voice carried the weight of wounded love. "How can you say you love me when your heart is not with me? 3 times you have mocked me and not told me where your great strength lies." She pressed him daily with her words and urged him until his soul was vexed to death. At last, unable to bear her continual pleading, Samson told her all his heart. "No razor has ever come upon my head," he whispered as she held him close, "for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." When Delilah heard these words, she knew at last that he had told her the truth. She sent word to the lords of the Philistines, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." They came, bringing the silver in their hands, their eyes gleaming with anticipated triumph. She made Samson sleep on her knees, calling for a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. As each lock fell to the floor like golden wheat at harvest time, she felt his strength departing from him. Then she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." He awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. The Philistines seized him at once. They gouged out his eyes, those eyes that had looked upon Delilah with such love, and brought him down to Gaza. There they bound him with bronze shackles and made him grind grain in the prison, like a beast of burden. The mighty judge of Israel, who had once carried away the gates of Gaza, now stumbled blindly in circles, turning the millstone while his enemies mocked. But in the darkness of his captivity, something began to change. The hair of his head began to grow again, and with it, slowly, quietly, his strength began to return. More importantly, in the depths of his humiliation, Samson's heart turned back to God. The man who had been driven by passion and anger began to find peace in prayer. The day came when the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon, celebrating their victory over their enemy. "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand," they cried, and their voices rose in drunken jubilation. The temple was filled with men and women, and about 3,000 more were on the roof watching as Samson was brought out to entertain them. Standing between the two central pillars that supported the great temple, Samson spoke quietly to the young man who guided him. "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Then, placing his hands upon the pillars, he lifted his face toward heaven and prayed with a heart finally made pure through suffering. "O Lord God, remember me and strengthen me only this once. O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." His prayer rose like incense through the smoke-filled air, reaching the throne of heaven where mercy and justice meet. Then Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars, one with his right hand and one with his left. "Let me die with the Philistines," he said, and he bowed with all his might. The house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. The dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. His brothers and all his father's house came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. Thus ended the life of Samson, a man whose greatest victory came through his greatest surrender. The story of strength and weakness, of love and betrayal, reminds us that even the mightiest among us carry within their hearts the seeds of both triumph and tragedy. But sometimes it is in our moments of greatest weakness that we discover the truest source of strength. And so, the tale of Samson flows like a river into the continuing story of God's people, where new chapters of faithfulness and love were yet to be written. In those same ancient times, when judges ruled in Israel and the land was often troubled by war and uncertainty, there lived a woman whose name would become synonymous with loyalty and devotion. Her story began not in triumph, but in the deepest sorrow, where 3 women found themselves bound together by grief and faced with impossible choices. Naomi had lived in Bethlehem with her husband Elimelech and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. But famine came to the land like a slow poison, withering the crops and driving families to desperation. Elimelech made the difficult decision to take his family across the Jordan River to the land of Moab, where reports said there was still food to be found. In Moab, they settled and tried to build a new life. The sons grew to manhood and married Moabite women. Mahlon married Ruth and Chilion married Orpah. For a time, it seemed that their exile might lead to blessing, that their small family might grow and prosper in this foreign land. But sorrow has a way of finding us even in our refuges. First, Elimelech died, leaving Naomi to lean on her sons for support. Then, within a few years, both Mahlon and Chilion died as well, leaving 3 widows to face an uncertain future together. In that ancient world, women without men to protect them were among the most vulnerable of all people. They had no inheritance, no means of support, no security beyond what family might provide. When Naomi heard that the famine in Judah had ended and the Lord had visited his people and given them food, she made the decision to return to Bethlehem. It would mean leaving behind everything familiar in Moab, but at least in her homeland she might find relatives who would help her survive. Ruth and Orpah prepared to accompany her, but as they set out on the road that led from Moab toward Judah, Naomi's heart was moved with concern for these young women who had shown her such kindness. She stopped and turned to them with tears in her eyes. "Go, return each of you to her mother's house," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." She kissed them both, and they all wept together on that dusty road. But Ruth and Orpah protested, "No, we will return with you to your people." They could not bear the thought of abandoning this woman who had become like a mother to them. Naomi shook her head sadly. "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I should have a husband tonight and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Again they wept together, and at last Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and turned back toward her father's house in Moab. It was a reasonable choice, perhaps the wise choice for a young woman who still had hope of marriage and children and a secure future. But Ruth clung to Naomi with a determination that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. When Naomi saw this, she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." What Ruth said next would echo through the centuries, becoming one of the most beautiful declarations of loyalty ever spoken. "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." The words hung in the air like a sacred vow, and Naomi saw that Ruth's mind was firmly made up. They continued on together, two widows against the world, walking the long road from Moab to Bethlehem with nothing but their love for each other and their faith in an uncertain future. When they arrived in Bethlehem, it was the beginning of the barley harvest. The whole town was stirred by their arrival, for Naomi had been gone for many years. The women said, "Is this Naomi?" But she replied to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Though Naomi felt empty and bitter, she was not truly alone. Ruth was with her, and in Ruth's faithful heart lay the seeds of a redemption that neither of them could yet imagine. The young Moabite woman looked upon the golden fields surrounding Bethlehem and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor," Ruth said to Naomi. Gleaning was the practice by which the poor could follow behind the harvesters, gathering the grain that was left behind or dropped. It was backbreaking work, and sometimes dangerous for a young woman alone, but it might provide enough food to keep them alive. Naomi agreed, and Ruth set out early in the morning, joining the other gleaners in the fields. As Providence would have it, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. Ruth did not know this yet. She simply worked wherever she was permitted, gathering the fallen grain with patient diligence. Boaz was a man of standing in Bethlehem, wealthy and respected, but also known for his kindness to those less fortunate. When he came from Bethlehem to check on his harvest, he greeted his workers with genuine warmth. "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." His eyes fell upon Ruth, who was working steadily among his fields. There was something about her manner, humble yet dignified, foreign yet somehow belonging, that caught his attention. He asked his foreman, "Whose young woman is this?" "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab," the foreman replied. "She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers.' So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest." Boaz was moved by what he heard. This young foreign woman had shown extraordinary loyalty to her mother-in-law, and now she was working hard to provide for them both. He approached Ruth with gentle courtesy. "Now, listen, my daughter," he said, his voice kind but authoritative. "Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." Ruth was overwhelmed by his kindness. She fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Boaz answered her with words that revealed the depth of his admiration. "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." At mealtime, Boaz invited Ruth to eat with his workers, personally serving her roasted grain until she was satisfied and had some left over. When she rose to glean again, he instructed his young men privately, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her, and also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. When she beat out what she had gleaned, it was about an ephah of barley, far more than a gleaner could normally expect to gather in a single day. She took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. When Naomi saw the abundance of grain and heard Ruth's account of the day, including the leftover food from Boaz's table, her eyes lit up with the first hope she had felt in years. "Blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead," Naomi said. Then she revealed the crucial information. "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." In the ancient law of Israel, a kinsman redeemer had the responsibility to help family members in distress, to buy back land that had been sold due to poverty, to marry a deceased relative's widow to preserve the family line, to protect and provide for those who had no other recourse. Boaz, as a relative of Elimelech, was such a redeemer. Through the long days of harvest, Ruth continued to glean in Boaz's fields, always staying close to his female workers as he had instructed. Naomi watched the kindness that Boaz showed to Ruth, and the respect and gratitude that Ruth showed in return, and a plan began to form in her mind. The relationship between Ruth and Boaz was growing, nurtured by daily encounters marked by courtesy, kindness, and mutual respect. Yet both were bound by the proprieties of their time and their situations. Ruth was a foreign widow with no standing, and Boaz was a prominent citizen who could not act improperly. Love was growing between them like grain in fertile soil, but it needed the right conditions to flourish. Naomi, watching with the wisdom of years and the sharp eyes of a woman who had learned to read the hearts of others, decided it was time to act. The harvest seasons were ending, and with them would end Ruth's daily opportunities to see Boaz in his fields. If happiness was to come to these two good people and security to her small family, someone needed to take bold action. The time had come for love to find its voice and for redemption to take its proper form. In the quiet evening hours, as the lamps flickered in their small dwelling, Naomi took Ruth's hands and shared with her a plan that would require great courage and complete trust in the goodness of the man who had shown them such kindness. As the barley harvest gave way to the wheat harvest, and the wheat harvest drew to its close, the rhythm of daily life in the fields created a gentle courtship between Ruth and Boaz. Each day she would arrive early and work diligently among the other gleaners. Each day he would ensure she was protected and provided for, finding excuses to speak with her, to ask after her welfare and that of Naomi. Their conversations were proper and brief, as befitted their stations, but in the brief exchanges of words, in the kindness of his instructions to his workers regarding her, and in the grateful dignity with which she received his generosity, something deeper was growing. The other workers noticed it, the way Boaz's eyes would seek her out across the field, the way Ruth would pause in her work when his voice could be heard giving directions to the reapers. Naomi, with the intuition of a woman who had loved and lost and learned to recognize the signs of the heart's awakening, saw what was happening. More than that, she understood the larger picture that neither Ruth nor Boaz could fully see from their respective positions. Boaz was indeed a kinsman redeemer, with both the right and the responsibility to help their family. Ruth, by her loyalty and virtue, had proven herself worthy of redemption, but the conventions of their society meant that neither could take the first step toward making this potential union a reality. As the harvest season drew to a close, Naomi knew that action was required. "My daughter," she said to Ruth one evening, "should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." The threshing floor was where the grain was separated from the chaff, usually a flat, elevated place where the wind could help carry away the lighter chaff while the heavier grain fell back down. During harvest time, it was customary for the owner to sleep at the threshing floor to guard the valuable grain from thieves. Naomi's plan was bold but not improper, rooted in the customs of their people regarding the rites of redemption. "Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor," she instructed Ruth. "But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." This was not a seduction, but a formal request for protection and redemption according to the customs of Israel. By lying at his feet and asking him to spread his cloak over her, Ruth would be asking Boaz to take her under his protection as her kinsman redeemer, to marry her according to the law and custom. Ruth's response showed the depth of her trust in Naomi's wisdom and her own courage. All that you say I will do." That night, Ruth bathed and anointed herself with precious oil, put on her best cloak, and made her way to the threshing floor. She watched from a distance as Boaz ate and drank with his workers, celebrating the successful completion of the harvest. His heart was merry, and when he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, Ruth noted the place carefully. When all was quiet and the workers had settled into sleep, Ruth approached softly. She uncovered his feet and lay down, her heart beating like a bird's wing against her ribs. There she waited through the long hours of the night, praying that her actions would be understood in the spirit in which they were intended. At midnight, Boaz stirred and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Startled, he asked, "Who are you?" "I am Ruth, your servant," she answered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." The Hebrew phrase she used, "spread your wings," was the same that Boaz had used earlier when he blessed her, saying that God would reward her for coming under his wings for refuge. Now she was asking Boaz to be the human instrument of that divine protection. Boaz was deeply moved by her request and by the honor she showed him. "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter," he said gently. "You have made this last kindness greater than the first in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." But there was a complication, and Boaz's honesty compelled him to reveal it. "And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. There was another relative who had the first right of redemption, and the law required that he be given the opportunity to fulfill that role before Boaz could act. "Remain tonight," Boaz said, "and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." Ruth lay at his feet until morning, but rose before dawn while it was still too dark for one person to recognize another. Boaz's concern for her reputation was tender and complete. "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor," he said. Then he filled her cloak with 6 measures of barley, saying, "Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed." When Ruth returned home, Naomi was waiting anxiously. "How did it go, my daughter?" she asked. Ruth told her all that had happened and showed her the generous gift of grain. Naomi smiled with satisfaction and relief. "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." True to his word, Boaz went up to the gate of the city early that morning. The city gate was where legal matters were conducted, where the elders gathered to witness transactions and settle disputes. He sat down and waited for the nearer kinsman to pass by. When the man appeared, Boaz called to him, "Turn aside, friend. Sit down here." The man turned aside and sat down. Then Boaz gathered 10 of the city elders and asked them to sit as witnesses. "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech," Boaz explained to the kinsman. "So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." The man was interested in the land. "I will redeem it," he said quickly, seeing an opportunity to add valuable property to his holdings. But then Boaz revealed the full extent of the obligation. The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. This changed everything. Taking the land was one thing, but marrying Ruth meant that any son born to them would be considered the heir of Ruth's deceased husband, inheriting the very land he would be purchasing. It would cost him money, but bring him no lasting benefit. "I cannot redeem it for myself," the kinsman said, "lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." In those days, it was the custom to confirm transactions by removing one sandal and giving it to the other party. The kinsman drew off his sandal and handed it to Boaz, formally transferring his rights as redeemer. Boaz stood before the elders, and all the people gathered at the gate and made his declaration. "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." All the people at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. The Lord blessed their union, and Ruth conceived and bore a son. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Naomi, their voices bright with joy. "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They called his name Obed. This child would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David, the greatest king Israel would ever know. Thus the loyalty of a young Moabite woman, choosing love over security and faithfulness over ease, became a thread in the great tapestry of God's plan for his people. Ruth's story shows us that redemption often comes through unexpected people, and that love, when it is true and selfless, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but the course of history itself. The thread of this story weaves seamlessly into the next chapter of Israel's saga, for in the royal line that began with Ruth and Boaz, a shepherd boy would soon be born whose courage would echo through the ages. In the little town of Bethlehem, where Ruth had found her redemption, young David was growing strong, tending his father's sheep and learning lessons that would prepare him for a destiny none could have imagined. In the rolling pastures around Bethlehem, where the morning mist clung to the hills like a soft prayer, a young shepherd boy moved among his father's flock with the easy confidence of one born to the task. His name was David, and he was the youngest of Jesse's 8 sons, great-grandson of that same Obed, whom Ruth and Boaz had welcomed into the world with such joy. David's days were spent in the ancient rhythm of pastoral life, leading the sheep to good grazing, finding fresh water, protecting them from predators, and bringing them safely home each evening. His hands, though young, were strong from handling wayward lambs and wielding his shepherd's staff. His eyes were keen from scanning the horizon for danger. His heart was tender from the solitude of the hills, where he had learned to commune with the Creator in the vast cathedral of the open sky. While David watched over his sheep, the kingdom of Israel found itself in turmoil. King Saul, who had started his reign with such promise, had grown troubled in spirit. An evil spirit tormented him, bringing dark moods and erratic behavior that alarmed his servants and his son Jonathan. On the advice of his court, Saul had sought a skillful musician to play the lyre and soothe his troubled mind. The call had gone out, and David, known in his region not only as a capable shepherd but as a gifted musician, had been summoned to the royal court. With his simple lyre, crafted from the wood of an olive tree, he would play songs that seemed to carry the peace of the countryside into the stone halls of the palace. When the evil spirit came upon Saul, David's music would drive it away, and the king would find relief. But on this particular day, as David returned from one of his visits to the court, he found his older brothers preparing for war. The Philistines, those ancient enemies of Israel, had gathered their armies for battle in the valley of Elah, about 15 miles from Bethlehem. King Saul had mustered the armies of Israel to meet them, and 3 of David's brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, were among the soldiers. Jesse, David's father, was concerned about his sons at the battlefront. He called David to him and said, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." So David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, taking the provisions and setting out as Jesse had commanded. The journey to the valley of Elah took him through countryside that grew more ominous as he approached the place where 2 armies faced each other across a narrow valley. He arrived at the encampment just as the army was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army, with the valley between them like a wound in the earth. David left the provisions with the keeper of the baggage and ran to the battle line to greet his brothers. As he talked with them, asking for news from home and assuring them of their father's love, a strange thing happened. From the ranks of the Philistines came a warrior unlike any David had ever seen. He was a giant of a man, standing over 9 feet tall, his body covered in bronze armor that caught the morning sun like the scales of some great dragon. This was Goliath of Gath, the champion of the Philistines, and his appearance struck fear into every heart in the Israelite army. His helmet was of bronze, and he wore a coat of mail weighing 5,000 shekels of bronze. Bronze armor covered his legs, and a javelin of bronze was slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point weighed 600 shekels. A shield-bearer walked before him, completing this picture of military might that seemed more like a walking fortress than a man. For 40 days, morning and evening, Goliath had come forward and presented himself before the armies of Israel, issuing the same thunderous challenge. Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." His voice rolled across the valley like thunder. "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together." When David heard these words, he looked around in amazement at the reaction of the Israelite soldiers. These were the same men who had followed Saul into numerous battles, who had proven their courage again and again. Yet now they fled from Goliath's presence, filled with great fear. For 40 days they had heard this challenge, and for 40 days no one had stepped forward to answer it. What troubled David most was not the giant's size or his armor, but his words. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" David asked, "that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The soldiers standing nearby heard the young shepherd's question and began to tell him about the reward King Saul had promised. "The king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." But David's interest was not in the reward. His heart burned with righteous anger at this affront to the God of Israel. When his eldest brother Eliab heard him talking with the men, his own anger flared. "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." David's reply was gentle, but firm. "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" He turned away from his brother and continued to ask the same questions of others, receiving the same answers about the king's promised reward. Word of the young shepherd's questions reached King Saul, and he sent for David. When the boy stood before the troubled king, his youth was immediately apparent, but there was something in his bearing, a quiet confidence, an untroubled faith, that caught Saul's attention. "Let no man's heart fail because of him," David said with conviction. "Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul looked at this young man, probably no more than 17 years old, smooth-cheeked and lean from his outdoor life. "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him," the king said gently, "for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David had an answer that spoke of experiences beyond his years. "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear, and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." Then David spoke the words that revealed the true source of his courage. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul, perhaps moved by the boy's faith, or simply desperate for anyone, willing to face Goliath, said, "Go, and the Lord be with you." The king tried to outfit David with his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. But when David tried to walk in the unfamiliar gear, he found he could barely move. "I cannot go with these," he said to Saul, "for I have not tested them." So he put them off and instead took up his shepherd's staff and went down to the brook that ran through the valley. There, in the clear running water, David chose 5 smooth stones, testing their weight and balance as any skilled shepherd would when selecting stones for his sling. He put them in his shepherd's pouch, took his sling in his hand, and walked out to meet the giant who had terrorized 2 armies for 40 days. When Goliath saw David approaching, he was insulted. Here was no warrior, no champion sent to meet him in honorable combat, but a mere boy with a shepherd's staff. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" the giant roared. "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." David's response rang clear across the valley, heard by both armies. "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." As Goliath moved forward to attack, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. He reached into his bag, took out a stone, fitted it to his sling, and with the practiced motion of years spent protecting sheep from predators, sent it flying toward the giant. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead and sank deep. The giant tottered for a moment, his massive frame swaying like a great tree in a storm, then fell face down on the ground with a crash that seemed to shake the very hills. David ran and stood over the fallen giant. Since he had no sword of his own, he drew Goliath's enormous blade from its sheath and cut off the giant's head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled in panic, and the men of Israel and Judah rose with a great shout and pursued them. The victory was complete, but for David, it was never about defeating Goliath. It was about defending the honor of the God of Israel. The same faith that had sustained him through lonely nights in the pasture, protecting his flock from wild beasts, had carried him through this moment when the fate of nations hung in the balance. King Saul watched in amazement as the young shepherd who had soothed his troubled spirit with music now became the hero who had saved his kingdom. But the king's heart was complex, and alongside his gratitude, other emotions began to stir. Emotions that would shape both his own destiny and David's in the years to come. The victory over Goliath marked the beginning of David's rise to prominence, but it also planted the seeds of a conflict that would test both his character and his faith in ways that even facing the giant had not. For in the heart of King Saul, admiration was already beginning to war with something darker, and the young shepherd who had found favor in God's sight would soon discover that human hearts could be more treacherous than any giant. The news of David's victory spread through Israel like wildfire on dry grass. In every town and village, people gathered to hear the incredible story of how a shepherd boy had defeated the giant champion of the Philistines with nothing but a sling and a stone. But more than the deed itself, it was David's words that captured their imagination. His declaration that the battle belonged to the Lord, his fearless faith in the face of impossible odds. King Saul, recognizing the young man's potential, decided not to let David return to his father's sheep. Instead, he kept him at court, making him part of his household. It was a natural decision. David had already proven his value both as a musician who could calm the king's troubled spirit and as a warrior of unexpected courage. At court, David quickly formed the deepest friendship of his life with Jonathan, Saul's eldest son and heir to the throne. Despite the difference in their stations, Jonathan was a prince, David a shepherd's son. Their souls were knit together by a bond that transcended politics and position. Jonathan saw in David not a rival for his inheritance, but a kindred spirit whose faith and courage inspired him to be better than he was. The friendship was sealed by a covenant that Jonathan initiated, stripping off his own robe, armor, sword, bow, and belt to give them to David. It was an act of profound symbolism, a prince clothing a shepherd in royal garments, acknowledging in David qualities that he honored above his own birthright. Meanwhile, David's military career flourished. Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted by all the people and also by Saul's servants. Wherever Saul sent him, David acted wisely and with success. His reputation grew not only for his skill in battle, but for his integrity in dealing with both soldiers and civilians. But success, especially success that captures the popular imagination, can be a dangerous gift. The first crack in Saul's relationship with David appeared when the victorious armies returned from their pursuit of the Philistines. As they entered the cities of Israel, women came out from all the cities to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with tambourines and instruments of joy. Their song, however, revealed where their hearts truly lay. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. The words hit Saul like a physical blow. They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. He thought bitterly. And what more can he have but the kingdom? From that day forward, Saul eyed David with suspicion, and the evil spirit that had once been soothed by David's music now turned that very music into a source of torment. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and in a moment of murderous impulse, he hurled it at David, thinking, "I will pin David to the wall." But David evaded him twice, his quick reflexes saving his life. The failed attempts at murder only increased Saul's fear of David, for he saw that the Lord was with the young man while he had departed from himself. In a move that he thought was cunning, Saul removed David from his immediate presence by making him a commander of 1,000, hoping that distance and the dangers of military campaigns might accomplish what his own spear had failed to do. But the plan backfired completely. David went out and came in before the people, leading them in battle and conducting himself with wisdom and integrity in all his dealings. His success in this new role only increased his popularity with the people and made Saul's fear grow into something approaching terror. In desperation, Saul conceived another plan. He offered David his eldest daughter Merab as wife, but with conditions designed to ensure David's death. "Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles," Saul said, thinking. "Let not my hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him." But David's response revealed his humble heart. "Who am I, and who are my relatives? my father's clan in Israel, that I should be the king's son-in-law. When the time came for Merab to be given to David, she was instead given to another man. However, Saul's younger daughter Michal had fallen in love with David, and when this was told to Saul, the thing pleased him. Here was another opportunity. I will give her to him, Saul thought, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Saul sent servants to speak to David secretly, saying, Behold, the king delights in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law. But again David demurred. Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation? When Saul heard David's words, he set a bride price designed to be deadly. The king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. Saul's plan was simple. Surely David would die attempting such a dangerous mission. But David was delighted with the opportunity to become the king's son-in-law on these terms. He and his men went out and killed not 100 but 200 Philistines, bringing back proof of their victory. Saul could not refuse to honor his word, and so Michal became David's wife. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his own daughter loved her husband, his fear turned to permanent hatred. He became David's enemy continually, but David continued to act more wisely than all of Saul's servants, so that his name was highly esteemed. The situation at court became increasingly tense. Saul's jealousy was no longer a private matter, but was beginning to affect the entire kingdom. His servants walked carefully, knowing that the king's moods were unpredictable and dangerous. Jonathan found himself caught between his love for his father and his loyalty to his friend. The crisis came to a head when Saul spoke openly to Jonathan and to all his servants about killing David. Jonathan, horrified by his father's intentions, warned David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you. Jonathan's intercession with his father was passionate and eloquent. Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand when he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? For a moment it seemed that reason would prevail. Saul listened to Jonathan's voice and swore, As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Jonathan called David from his hiding place and told him all these things, and David returned to the king's presence as before. But the reprieve was temporary. When war broke out again with the Philistines and David went out to fight, winning another great victory, the evil spirit came upon Saul again as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand. Once more he tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but David slipped away, and the spear struck into the wall. That night, David fled. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, If you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. She let him down through a window, and he escaped into the night. Michal then took an image and laid it on the bed, putting a pillow of goat's hair at its head and covering it with clothes. When Saul's messengers came to take David, she said, "He is sick." But when they came back with orders to bring David in the bed, they discovered the deception. David was now a fugitive, but his flight from Saul's murderous jealousy would become a journey of preparation, testing, and spiritual growth that would prepare him for the kingship that God had already promised him through the prophet Samuel. In the wilderness, pursued by the very king he had served faithfully, David would learn lessons about leadership, forgiveness, and dependence on God that no royal court could have taught him. His first refuge was with Samuel at Ramah, where the old prophet who had anointed him as a boy still lived and taught. Samuel received him with compassion, and together they went to Naioth, where there was a community of prophets. When Saul heard where David had gone, he sent messengers to take him. But something extraordinary happened. The Spirit of God came upon the messengers, and they began to prophesy instead of capturing David. Saul sent other messengers, and the same thing happened. When he sent a third group with the same result, Saul decided to go himself. But as he approached Naioth, the Spirit of God came upon him too, and he prophesied all the way to Ramah, even stripping off his clothes and lying down naked all day and night. People who witnessed this strange scene asked, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" This respite gave David the opportunity to meet secretly with Jonathan one more time. Their meeting was heartbreaking, filled with the pain of friends who knew they might never see each other again. Jonathan, torn between his loyalty to his father and his love for David, agreed to test Saul's intentions at the feast of the new moon. David was supposed to attend this royal feast, but he hid in the field while Jonathan went to discover his father's true feelings. When Saul asked why David's place was empty, Jonathan gave the excuse they had agreed upon, that David had asked permission to attend a family sacrifice in Bethlehem. Saul's anger exploded. "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." When Jonathan asked why David deserved death, Saul hurled his spear at his own son, the same spear he had twice hurled at David. Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger, eating no food that day because he was grieved for David and because his father had disgraced him. The next morning, Jonathan went out to the field where David was hiding, and using a prearranged signal involving arrows shot by a young boy, let David know that he must flee permanently. After the boy was sent away, David came out from his hiding place, and the two friends embraced and wept together, knowing this was likely their final farewell. Jonathan's last words to David were a blessing and a prophecy. "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.'" And so David departed into the wilderness, beginning a period of exile that would last for years. But he did not go as a bitter man seeking revenge. Instead, he went as one who trusted that God's purposes would ultimately prevail, carrying with him the memory of true friendship and the knowledge that even in the darkest times, God's hand was guiding his steps. The wilderness would be harsh, but it would also be a place of preparation. In chaos caves and strongholds, leading a band of men who, like himself, had been marginalized by Saul's increasingly erratic rule, David would learn the lessons of leadership that no palace could have taught. And in his treatment of the king who sought his life, he would demonstrate a nobility of character that would prove his fitness for the throne he had been promised. In the barren hills and hidden valleys of Judah's wilderness, David found himself leading an ever-growing band of unlikely followers. They came to him from all walks of life, men who were in distress, men who were in debt, men who were discontented with Saul's increasingly oppressive rule. About 400 men gathered around him, and David became their captain. These were not seasoned soldiers, but desperate men seeking hope and leadership. Yet under David's guidance, they became a formidable force, bound together by loyalty to their leader and a shared sense of purpose. David treated them with fairness and respect, sharing their hardships and never asking them to face dangers he would not face himself. Their base was often the cave of Adullam, a vast limestone cavern in the hills between Jerusalem and the Philistine territory. Here, in the echoing chambers lit by oil lamps and campfires, David's men would gather to hear their leader's plans, to share their meager provisions, and to find comfort in songs that David composed during the long nights of exile. It was during this period that David wrote many of his most beautiful psalms, pouring out his heart to God in words that would comfort believers for thousands of years to come. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want," he wrote, drawing on his own experience as a keeper of sheep to express his trust in divine providence. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." King Saul, meanwhile, had become consumed with hunting David. He pursued him with 3,000 chosen men of Israel, searching every cave and stronghold, following every rumor of David's whereabouts. The chase led them through the wilderness of Ziph, the wilderness of Maon, and the strongholds of En-gedi, where David and his men hid among the wild goats on the rocky cliffs. It was at En-gedi that the first great test of David's character occurred. Saul had entered a cave to relieve himself, not knowing that David and his men were hiding in the depths of that very cave. David's men whispered excitedly, "This is the day the Lord has delivered your enemy into your hand." They urged him to kill Saul and end their exile once and for all. But David crept forward silently, and instead of taking Saul's life, cut off a corner of the king's robe. Even this small act filled him with remorse afterward. "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed," he told his men, "to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." After Saul left the cave, David emerged and called after him, "My lord the king." When Saul looked back, David bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. Then, holding up the piece of robe he had cut, he said, "See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it." David's speech was eloquent and moving. "May the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you." Saul was deeply moved. he lifted up his voice and wept, saying, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. You have declared this day how you have dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands." Then Saul made a remarkable admission. "I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand." For a moment it seemed that reconciliation might be possible. Saul asked David to swear that he would not cut off his descendants or destroy his name from his father's house, and David gave him this oath. Then Saul went home, but David and his men remained in the stronghold, for David knew that Saul's moods were changeable and that safety lay only in continued vigilance. The second great test came in the wilderness of Ziph. Once again, Saul had come out with 3,000 men to seek David. David sent out spies and learned exactly where Saul was encamped. That night, he took Abishai, one of his most loyal followers, and they crept into Saul's camp, where the king lay sleeping, his spear stuck in the ground at his head and his water jar beside him. Abishai whispered urgently, "God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice." But David refused. "Do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" Instead, David took Saul's spear and water jar, and they slipped away undetected. From a distant hilltop, David called out to Abner, Saul's general, "Will you not answer, Abner?" When Abner responded, David chided him, "Are you not a man who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is and the water jar that was at his head." Saul recognized David's voice and again was filled with remorse. "I have sinned," he called out. "Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake." David's response showed both his continued respect for Saul's office and his growing wisdom. "Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed." These encounters with Saul revealed the nobility of David's character and his deep understanding of divine sovereignty. He could have ended his exile and claimed his throne by violence, but he chose instead to trust in God's timing and methods. He understood that how he gained the throne would affect how he ruled from it, and he was determined that his kingship should be founded on righteousness, not revenge. The years of exile were drawing to a close, though David did not yet know it. In the palace, Jonathan continued to love his friend from afar, while Michal, David's wife, was given by her father to another man. Saul's reign was becoming increasingly unstable, marked by paranoia and poor decisions that alienated his own people. But in the wilderness, David was being forged into the leader Israel needed. His men were becoming a disciplined force, bound to him by love and loyalty rather than mere fear. His own character was being refined by hardship and tested by opportunity. And his faith in God was deepening into an unshakable trust that would sustain him through the challenges of kingship that lay ahead. The Psalms he wrote during this period reflect a man learning to find strength in weakness, hope in despair, and victory through surrender to divine will. "I waited patiently for the Lord," he wrote, "and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure." Soon, very soon, those steps would carry him not through wilderness caves, but through the gates of Jerusalem, not as a fugitive, but as a king. But first, one more chapter in this long story needed to be written, a chapter that would end Saul's troubled reign and open the way for David's glorious one. The years of pursuit and exile were taking their toll not just on David and his men, but on the entire kingdom of Israel. Saul's obsession with hunting David had distracted him from his duties as king, leaving the borders vulnerable and the people without strong leadership. The Philistines, recognizing Israel's weakness, began to mass their armies for what they hoped would be a decisive campaign. When news reached Saul that the Philistines were gathering at Aphek, while Israel's armies assembled at the spring in Jezreel, a cold fear gripped the king's heart. This was no border skirmish, but a full-scale war, and Saul found himself facing the greatest crisis of his reign without the one man whose military genius might have saved the day: David, whom he had driven into exile. On the eve of battle, Saul sought guidance from the Lord through the usual channels: dreams, the sacred lots called Urim and Thummim, and the prophets. But the heavens seemed silent, offering no counsel to the troubled king. In desperation, Saul turned to forbidden practices, seeking out a medium at Endor who might call up the spirit of the prophet Samuel. The seance was a dark and terrible affair. When the spirit of Samuel appeared, his message was one of judgment. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" the prophet's shade demanded. "The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me." The next day, on Mount Gilboa, the prophecy was fulfilled. The battle went badly for Israel from the beginning. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and Jonathan, David's beloved friend, fell in the fighting along with his brothers Abinadab and Malchishua. Saul himself was wounded by arrows, and seeing that all was lost, fell upon his own sword rather than be captured alive. When David received news of Saul's death, his reaction revealed the depth of his character. Instead of celebrating the removal of his enemy, he tore his clothes and mourned, fasting until evening for Saul and for Jonathan and for all the house of Israel who had fallen by the sword. The young Amalekite who brought the news, thinking to curry favor by claiming he had killed Saul himself, was executed by David's command for laying hands on the Lord's anointed. But it was David's lament for Saul and Jonathan that showed most clearly the greatness of his heart. In words that rank among the most beautiful in all literature, he poured out his grief. "Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely. In life and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. This lament became the song that would be taught to the children of Judah, ensuring that the memory of Saul and Jonathan would be preserved in honor rather than in bitterness. David's magnanimity in the hour of his triumph set the tone for his reign and established him in the hearts of his people as a man capable of both justice and mercy. After a period of mourning, David inquired of the Lord where he should go, and the divine answer was clear: go up to Hebron. So David went up with his 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail, and all his men with their households, and they settled in the towns around Hebron. There the men of Judah came and anointed David king over the house of Judah. The transition to full kingship would not be immediate. Saul's general, Abner, made Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, king over the northern tribes of Israel, leading to a period of civil war. But David's eventual triumph was assured, not by his military might alone, but by the recognition that he was indeed God's chosen king. When the time came for David to be crowned king over all Israel, the ceremony took place at Hebron with representatives from all 12 tribes. They acknowledged that even during Saul's reign, it was David who had led Israel's armies to victory, and they remembered the divine promise that he would shepherd God's people. The anointing oil that had first touched his head when he was a boy tending sheep in Bethlehem now consecrated him as king over the united kingdom of Israel. From shepherd to court musician, from giant slayer to fugitive, from exile to monarch, the journey had been long and often painful, but every step had prepared him for this moment. As king, David's first great act was to capture Jerusalem from the Jebusites, making it his capital, the city of David. It was a brilliant political move, choosing a city that belonged to no single tribe as the center of his united kingdom. But it was also a spiritual decision, for Jerusalem would become not just the political capital, but the religious heart of Israel. The boy who had once played his harp to soothe a troubled king's spirit had become a king himself, and under his rule, Israel would know its greatest period of peace, prosperity, and spiritual blessing. But David's story was far from over. His greatest triumphs and his deepest failures still lay ahead, and the kingdom he had inherited would require all the wisdom, courage, and faith he had gained during his long journey from the sheepfolds of Bethlehem to the throne of Israel. The transformation was remarkable to witness. This man who had spent years hiding in caves and wandering through wilderness had now become the most powerful ruler in the region. David's kingdom stretched from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, and tribute flowed into Jerusalem from nations that had once threatened Israel's borders. Yet for all his military and political success, David understood that true greatness lay not in the accumulation of power, but in wisdom and righteousness. As he established his kingdom and organized his government, He looked beyond the immediate needs of administration to the deeper questions of how to rule with justice and how to create a society that honored God. It was during this period of consolidation and growth that a profound moment of spiritual insight came to the king. David had built himself a magnificent palace of cedar wood, with spacious rooms and beautiful courtyards. As he walked through his royal residence one evening, enjoying the cool air that came with sunset, his thoughts turned to the Ark of the Covenant, which still resided in a simple tent as it had during the wilderness wanderings. The contrast troubled him deeply. Here he was, living in luxury, while the symbol of God's presence among his people remained in temporary quarters. He shared his concern with Nathan the prophet, saying, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent." Nathan's initial response was encouraging. "Go, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you." But that night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan with a different message, one that would redirect David's ambitions toward an even greater purpose. "Go and tell my servant David," the Lord said. "Thus says the Lord, would you build me a house to dwell in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. In all places where I have moved with all the people of Israel, did I ever speak a word with any of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?'" The message continued with both a gentle rebuke and a magnificent promise. "Now, therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth." But the most stunning part of the divine message was still to come. "When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." David would not build the temple, but his son would. More than that, David's dynasty would endure forever, pointing toward a greater David who would one day come to establish an eternal kingdom. The shepherd boy who had been anointed in secret by Samuel was now being promised that his lineage would extend beyond time itself. When Nathan delivered this prophecy, David was overwhelmed. He went before the ark and sat in the presence of the Lord, his heart full of wonder and gratitude. His prayer that day revealed the humility that had always marked his character, even in the height of his power. "Who am I, O Lord God, and what is my house, that you have brought me thus far? And yet this was a small thing in your eyes, O Lord God. You have spoken also of your servant's house for a great while to come, and this is instruction for mankind, O Lord God. And what more can David say to you? For you know your servant, O Lord God. Because of your promise, and according to your own heart, you have brought about all this greatness to make your servant know it." The promise of the temple to be built by his son became one of David's great motivations. Though he would not construct it himself, he could prepare for it, gathering materials and making plans. He organized the priests and Levites, collected gold and silver and precious stones, and drew up detailed blueprints for the house that would bear God's name. But even as David looked forward to the temple his son would build, he faced immediate challenges that tested both his wisdom and his faith. Not all of these challenges came from external enemies. Some of the most difficult arose from within his own household and kingdom. The very success that God had blessed him with brought temptations that the shepherd boy in the fields of Bethlehem had never imagined. Power, wealth, and the adoration of the people created opportunities for pride and self-indulgence that required constant vigilance to resist. David's heart was generally turned toward God, but he remained a man with human weaknesses and desires. It was during this time of prosperity and peace that David's son Solomon was born to Bathsheba, the child who would inherit not only his father's throne, but also the privilege of building the temple that David had dreamed of constructing. Solomon's birth represented hope and continuity, the promise that David's line would indeed endure, and that God's purposes would be fulfilled through his descendants. As Solomon grew from infancy to boyhood, David watched him carefully, recognizing in his son qualities that would suit him for kingship. The child was intelligent and curious, with a mind that seemed to grasp complex concepts with unusual clarity. But more than intellectual gifts, Solomon showed signs of spiritual sensitivity and a desire to understand the deeper truths about God and his ways. When Solomon was still a young man, events began to unfold that would test the kingdom and the royal family in ways that none of them expected. David, now growing older, faced the reality that he would not live forever, and that the question of succession needed to be settled. Though Solomon had been chosen by God to inherit the throne, not all of David's sons were content with this arrangement. The aging king found himself dealing with palace intrigue, family rivalries, and political maneuvering that threatened to tear apart the kingdom he had worked so hard to build and unify. It was during this challenging period that David's wisdom as both a king and a father would be put to the ultimate test. Yet through all these trials, the promise remained. Solomon would build the temple. David's line would endure forever. And in the fullness of time, an even greater son of David would come to establish a kingdom that would never end. As David prepared to pass the throne to Solomon, he reflected on the long journey that had brought him from the sheepfolds of Bethlehem to the palace in Jerusalem. Every step of the way, he had learned to trust in the faithfulness of the God who had called him, anointed him, and sustained him through dangers and difficulties beyond counting. Now it would be Solomon's turn to learn these same lessons, to discover that the greatest kings are those who recognize their dependence on the King of Kings. The transition was approaching, and with it would come new challenges, new opportunities, and new revelations of divine wisdom and grace. The coronation of Solomon took place during a time of political uncertainty, when his half-brother Adonijah had attempted to claim the throne for himself. But David, though old and frail, acted decisively when informed of the situation by Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet. He ordered that Solomon be anointed king immediately at the spring of Gihon, with all the ceremony and celebration due to a divinely appointed monarch. As the sounds of celebration echoed through Jerusalem, the blowing of horns, the shouting of the people, and the music of flutes, it became clear that the transition had been accomplished smoothly. Adonijah's supporters melted away, recognizing that God's choice had been made manifest, and Solomon's reign began with the blessing and support of both heaven and earth. In his final words to his son, David shared the wisdom he had gained through decades of ruling God's people. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. The torch was being passed from father to son, from the shepherd who had become king to the prince who would become the wisest ruler in history. And as Solomon took his place on the throne that his father had established, he carried with him not only the crown of Israel, but the promise that through his reign, the purposes of God would unfold in ways that would astonish the world. The young king who now sat upon the throne of Israel faced challenges that would have daunted even the most experienced ruler. At barely 20 years of age, Solomon inherited a vast kingdom, a complex government, and the enormous responsibility of following in the footsteps of his legendary father. The weight of expectation was immense. The people remembered David's victories, his wisdom, his devotion to God, and they wondered whether this untested young man could measure up to such a legacy. But Solomon understood something that his youth might have obscured from others. He knew that he could not rule successfully through his own strength and wisdom alone. Unlike many young rulers who might have been intoxicated by power or overwhelmed by pride, Solomon felt keenly the magnitude of his inadequacy for the task before him. It was this recognition of his own limitations that led to one of the most significant moments in his early reign. Not long after his coronation, Solomon went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices at the great high place there. Gibeon was where the tabernacle had been kept before David brought the ark to Jerusalem, and it remained an important site for worship and seeking divine guidance. That night, as Solomon slept after offering 1,000 burnt offerings to show his devotion, the Lord appeared to him in a dream. The divine visitation was both wonderful and terrifying, for God spoke directly to the young king with an offer that was unprecedented in its generosity. "Ask what I shall give you," the Lord said. It was the kind of invitation that might have tempted any ruler toward selfish ambition. Solomon could have asked for military might to expand his borders, for wealth to surpass all other kings, for a long life to enjoy his position, or for victory over his enemies. Any of these requests would have been understandable from a young monarch seeking to establish himself. But Solomon's response revealed the depth of his character and his understanding of what truly mattered in leadership. His request was humble, thoughtful, and focused entirely on his ability to serve his people well, rather than on personal gain. "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father," Solomon began, "because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day." Solomon's acknowledgement of his father's legacy and God's faithfulness to David showed both filial respect and spiritual maturity. He understood that his own position was not the result of his own merit, but of divine grace extended through his family line. Then came the heart of his request. "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in, and your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding heart to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people? The request was remarkable in several ways. First, Solomon acknowledged his youth and inexperience without making excuses. He simply stated the reality of his situation and his need for help. Second, he focused not on his own needs, but on his responsibility to the people he would govern. Third, he asked specifically for wisdom and discernment, recognizing that these qualities were essential for just leadership. The Lord was greatly pleased with Solomon's request. Instead of asking for personal advantage, the young king had asked for the ability to serve others well. This demonstrated the kind of heart that God could trust with great blessings. Because you have asked this, God replied, and have not asked for yourself long life, or riches, or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. Behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. But God's generosity went far beyond what Solomon had requested. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. When Solomon awoke from the dream, he was filled with awe at what had occurred. He returned to Jerusalem and stood before the Ark of the Covenant, offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, and making a feast for all his servants. The divine encounter had marked the beginning of a reign that would become legendary for its wisdom, prosperity, and spiritual significance. The first test of Solomon's newly granted wisdom came sooner than he might have expected, in a case that would become one of the most famous examples of judicial wisdom in all of history. Two women came before the king with a dispute that seemed impossible to resolve through normal legal proceedings. Both women lived in the same house and had given birth to sons within 3 days of each other. During the night, one of the babies had died, and each woman claimed that the living child was hers and that the dead child belonged to the other. There were no witnesses to the tragedy, no evidence beyond the women's conflicting testimonies, no way to determine the truth through conventional means. This woman's son died in the night, said the first woman, because she lay on him, and she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me, while your servant slept, and laid him at her breast, and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, behold, he was not the child that I had borne. The second woman contradicted her. No, the living child is mine, and the dead child is yours. And the first replied, no, the dead child is yours, and the living child is mine. The case presented exactly the kind of challenge that tested a judge's wisdom. Both women were desperate mothers. Both were equally insistent on their claims, and both had equal standing before the law. Any decision based purely on testimony would be arbitrary, leaving one mother grieving and the other triumphant, but with no guarantee that justice had been served. Solomon listened carefully to both women, observing not just their words but their demeanor, their emotions, the subtle signs that might reveal truth from falsehood. Then he called for his sword to be brought, and what he proposed next shocked everyone present in the court. "Divide the living child in two," the king commanded, "and give half to the one and half to the other." The response was immediate and telling. The first woman, whose heart was filled with compassion for the living child, cried out in anguish, "O my Lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death." Her maternal love was so strong that she was willing to lose her son rather than see him harmed. But the second woman's reaction was chillingly different. "He shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide him." In that moment, the truth was revealed as clearly as if it had been written in letters of fire. The real mother's love for her child was so deep that she would rather see him live with another woman than see him die. The false claimant, motivated by jealousy and bitterness rather than love, was willing to see the child destroyed if she could not have him for herself. "Give the living child to the first woman," Solomon declared, "and by no means put him to death. She is his mother." When all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, they stood in awe of him, for they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. The case became legendary, not just for its clever resolution, but for what it revealed about the nature of true wisdom. That it goes beyond mere cleverness to touch the deepest truths about human nature, love, and justice. This early demonstration of Solomon's God-given wisdom established his reputation throughout his kingdom and beyond. Word spread to neighboring nations of the young king, whose understanding surpassed all conventional learning, whose judgments were marked by insight that seemed to pierce through deception to the truth beneath. But this was only the beginning. The wisdom that God had granted Solomon would manifest itself in many ways. In his administration of the kingdom, in his international diplomacy, in his literary works, and ultimately in the great temple that would fulfill his father's dream and establish Jerusalem as the spiritual center of the ancient world. The building of the temple represented the culmination of years of preparation and the fulfillment of divine promises that reached back through generations. David had gathered the materials, drawn up the plans, and organized the workforce, but it fell to Solomon to transform these preparations into reality. The site chosen for the temple was Mount Moriah, the same place where Abraham had been willing to sacrifice Isaac, and where David had built an altar after purchasing the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. It was a location rich in spiritual significance, where faith had been tested and proven, where divine mercy had been revealed, where heaven and earth seemed to meet. The construction project was unlike anything Israel had ever attempted. Solomon made a treaty with Hiram, king of Tyre, who provided cedar logs from Lebanon and skilled craftsmen to work alongside the Israelites. The scale of the operation was enormous. Tens of thousands of workers were involved, from stone cutters in the quarries to carpenters shaping the cedar beams, from metal workers casting bronze fixtures to artists creating the intricate decorative elements. The temple itself was designed according to the pattern that God had revealed to David, expanded and elaborated to reflect the glory and majesty of the God who would dwell there. The main structure was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, built of stone finished at the quarry, so that no hammer or chisel or any tool of iron was heard in the temple while it was being built. The interior was lined with cedar wood and overlaid with pure gold, creating an atmosphere of warmth and splendor that spoke of divine glory. The most sacred space was the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant would rest beneath the outstretched wings of two great cherubim carved from olive wood and covered with gold. For 7 years the work continued, with Solomon overseeing every detail personally, ensuring that nothing was done hastily or carelessly in this house that would bear the name of the Lord. When at last the construction was complete, the result was breathtaking. A building that combined architectural magnificence with spiritual significance, a worthy dwelling place for the presence of the Almighty. The dedication of the temple was an event that drew representatives from throughout Israel and beyond. Solomon had prepared carefully for this moment, gathering the elders of Israel, the heads of the tribes, and the leaders of the fathers' houses to bring up the Ark of the Covenant from the city of David to its new home. As the priests carried the Ark into the Holy of Holies and placed it beneath the wings of the cherubim, something extraordinary happened. A cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Solomon's prayer of dedication was one of the most beautiful and comprehensive prayers in all of Scripture, acknowledging both God's faithfulness to his promises and the wonder of his presence dwelling among his people. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Solomon asked with awe. Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built? Yet even as he recognized the impossibility of containing the infinite God within any human structure, Solomon understood the temple's true purpose, not as a prison for deity, but as a focal point for worship, a place where people could come to pray and know that their prayers were heard, a symbol of God's presence with his chosen people. The dedication ceremony lasted for 7 days, followed by the Feast of Tabernacles for another 7 days. Sacrifices were offered in numbers that had never been seen before, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. The celebration was a joyous recognition that God's promises to David had been fulfilled, that Israel now had a permanent place of worship, and that Solomon's wisdom had been manifested in this greatest of all his achievements. When the ceremonies were complete and the people had returned to their homes, they went with hearts full of joy and gratitude for all the goodness that the Lord had shown to David, his servant, and to Israel, his people. The temple stood as a testament to divine faithfulness, human skill, and the wisdom of a king who had sought first the kingdom of God and found that all other blessings followed. The reign of Solomon had reached its pinnacle. The shepherd boy's son had become the greatest king in Israel's history, ruling over a kingdom that stretched from the river of Egypt to the river Euphrates, dwelling in peace with all his neighbors, blessed with wisdom that made him renowned throughout the known world, and having built a temple that would be remembered as one of the wonders of the ancient world. Yet the story was not quite complete. The greatest achievements of Solomon's reign, his wisdom in judgment, his building of the temple, his establishment of a golden age of peace and prosperity, had grown from a single moment of humble prayer when a young king asked not for personal gain, but for the ability to serve his people well. It was a reminder that true greatness comes not from taking, but from giving, not from being served, but from serving others, and that the greatest wisdom of all is the recognition that we are never greater than when we acknowledge our dependence on the one who is truly great. As the years passed and Solomon's fame spread throughout the world, visitors came from distant lands to see for themselves the king whose wisdom was legendary and whose kingdom prospered under divine blessing. The temple he had built became not just the center of Jewish worship, but a wonder that drew pilgrims and dignitaries from across the ancient world, all marveling at the skill of its construction and the glory of its appearance. The stories of Solomon's wisdom, his great judgment, and his magnificent temple would be told and retold through countless generations, inspiring leaders to seek wisdom over wealth, justice over personal gain, and the glory of God over the praise of men. In every age, when people faced impossible decisions or sought to build something lasting and beautiful, they would remember the young king who asked for an understanding heart and received blessing beyond his dreams. And so the ancient stories flow together like streams converging into a great river. The strength of Samson, the loyalty of Ruth, the courage of David, and the wisdom of Solomon, all part of the continuing narrative of a people chosen by God and guided by his hand through triumph and tragedy, through exile and return, through the rise and fall of kingdoms, toward purposes that extend beyond time into eternity itself.